And we are unarmed. We are human rights observers. We are going to be staying here. And we will be knowing what you do. And if you shoot at this house, you will endanger the lives of internationals and innocent women and children. And the world will know. Do not shoot all over this community. And we are here, and we see what you do. We are from the United States of America. We are from Britain, and we are from Italy. And our embassies and governments know that we are here. And the international media knows that we are here. Do not shoot at innocent women and children. And if you try, you may injure an international. And there will be international ramifications for such an action.
I've been here for about a month and a half now, and this is definitely the most difficult situation that I've ever seen. In the time that I've been here, children have been shot and killed. On the 30th of January, the Israeli military bulldozed the two largest water wells, destroying over half of Rafah's water supply. Every few days, if not every day, houses are demolished here. People are economically devastated because of the closure of the borders into Egypt and the extreme control of the Gazan economy by Israel. I came to look at the aftermath of a place where 25 greenhouses had been demolished on the other side of Rafah, destroying the livelihoods of about 300 people. And that had taken place while they rounded up about 150 men, held them under a sniper tower, and shot around them to contain the men, the farmers in the area. So I feel like what I'm witnessing here is a very systematic destruction of people's ability to survive. And that is incredibly horrifying. It's incredibly horrifying.
In 1968, there was a revolt in Europe, all over Europe. May 1968, there was almost a barricade revolution in Paris. And then there was a student revolution led by Cohen in Germany. There was a Maoist tendency all over the youth in Europe. But then it was crushed. And all these revolutionaries and democratic and human rights supporters found in the Palestinian Revolution one way of breathing freedom and expressing their own wish and will to fight oppression and to support freedom and human rights. Lots of them came to the Palestinian Revolution, different organizations, either as volunteers to fight, or volunteers on the medical level, or volunteers on kindergarten level teaching kids, or volunteers on human rights defense level. Thousands of Europeans, Americans came before 1971 to Jordan and joined us. Afterwards to Lebanon and joined us, and they really did a good help.
My first contact with Palestinians was actually back in 1975 in the refugee camp of Tel Azatar in East Beirut at that time. I was a young student and we went out with a number of Dutch students to a summer holiday work camp in Tel Azatar. It involved working on the road towards the school in the camp, making the road better. And at the same time we got into contact with lots of families. We learned about, the Palestinian people, how they were living in exile. And we learned about the Palestinian resistance movement as well. At that time I was an anthropology student, and I felt that I wasn't doing very much practical help, so I decided to train as a nurse, which I did between 1977 and 1982, beginning of 1982. And when I finished, I traveled to Lebanon and decided to volunteer for the Palestine Red Crescent Society in one of their hospitals. And as it happened, when I arrived in Lebanon, the Israeli invasion into Lebanon in 1982 had already started. So it was for me a baptism of fire, working in a PSCS field hospital called Lahut in the northern part of West Beirut. And for me this was really a baptism by fire. But I came through it quite well actually, and it just made my resolve to work for the Palestinian people for a long time much stronger.
Historically, there was a growth of solidarity movement with Palestine, starting from '67. It reached many peaks, 70s, 80s. Then what happened was there were two problems with the solidarity movement in the 90s, or end of 80s, beginning of 90s. The first problem was the institutionalization of relationship between solidarity groups. It became somehow, because the government started to open up to the PLO, the care about the popular grassroots movement declined. The second problem was with Oslo. The Oslo Agreement and the signing of Oslo and then receiving the Nobel Prize for Peace and all of that created an image which Israel nurtured a lot. The image that peace is already there in the Holy Land. And if there is peace, you don't need a solidarity movement. Unilateral peace, unilateral abstention of struggle from one side, which is the Palestinian side, while the Israelis continued attacks and arrests and settlement building, and practically it was unilateral ceasefire, which was presented to the world as peace. And that dramatically hurt and affected the solidarity movement. Many of them disagreed politically with what the PLO did. And this whole thing, suddenly when the Intifada started, immediately the bridges were re-established with the solidarity movement.
At the end of September 2002, the Second Palestinian Intifada, or uprising, broke out as Palestinians took to the streets to demand their freedom and an immediate end to Israeli occupation. For 7 years prior, while the world talked about peace and everyone put their efforts into the Oslo peace process, the Israeli government did not move to end the occupation and give Palestinians their independence, but instead used the guise of peace to cement the occupation. During 7 years that the world talked about peace, more Palestinian land was confiscated, settlements on stolen Palestinian land and settlers doubled, water was confiscated, Palestinian areas were closed off, roadblocks and checkpoints increased. All of this, while the world talked about peace, Palestinian hopes and dreams were shattered.
The ISM was started by my wife and some other international activists and Palestinians who were seeking to resist and struggle against the occupation and for their freedom by using nonviolent direct action against the occupation. The ISM was founded to create a resource for Palestinians who sought to use nonviolence as their method of struggle. The Israeli military, we know, has tremendous resources at its disposal. The occupation has billions of dollars coming from this country and other countries around the world. Weapons, Caterpillar bulldozers. But what do the Palestinians have who wish to resist? What do the people who wish to take to the streets and use the one strength that the Palestinian people have that cannot be taken away from them, the unity and the strength of the community, the sense of sumud, steadfastness?
Sometimes it takes a while for it to set in what is happening here, because I think many of the people here, they try to maintain what they can of their lives, and I don't know, maybe it has to do with protecting their children, that they try to be happy, joke with their children. So sometimes it takes time to it's hard to hold in your mind, you know, the complete reality of what's happening here. Sometimes I'm sitting down to dinner with people and I just realize that that there is a massive military machine surrounding them and trying to kill these people that I'm having dinner with, these families that I'm sitting down to eat with, and who are being very generous and kind to me, and their children here who are incredibly threatened, living lives that no child ever should have to live, and so I feel a lot of horror, really. I feel a lot of horror about the situation.
The idea came to get the international community involved, and not just involved in solidarity actions around the world, but involved on the ground in the occupied Palestinian territories. For the international community was not filling its role to the Palestinian people of providing them with protection and taking action to uphold their basic right to life and to freedom.
People who struggle for their rights, people who struggle for freedom, there's one thing common to all of these people around the world. It is the symbolism of the Palestinian flag. You see it in Northern Ireland, you see it among the peasants in Colombia, you see it in Chiapas, You see it in this country, you see it everywhere. And so we decided, those of us who are living in the occupied territories and working with Palestinians, that there had to be a way to manifest this solidarity that people felt, this identification people had with the Palestinian struggle. And so we decided to ask people to come and join us in the occupied territories. And quite honestly, to this day, I still can't believe people come. I thought, no way, nobody's going to come here. Look what they see on TV. People are being killed every day. It's a massive military with helicopters and planes. And I was living there and I couldn't imagine anybody would want to come and do what I do. And yet, in August of 2001, 50 people came.
The idea was that we would get international civilians to join us and to fulfill the role that their respective governments and formal entities like the United Nations were not fulfilling. We undertook a few actions to encourage the popular resistance to continue, and in August of 2001 we issued a large campaign where we invited people from all over the world to come join us. In August of 2001, approximately 50 civilians from all over the world, but mainly from the United States and the UK, came to the occupied Palestinian territories. We trained them in the situation and how to respond to Israeli soldier violence. And we took to the streets in a coordinated campaign directed at highlighting Israeli occupation brutality. After that, the word spread. And in December of 2001, over 100 civilians joined us, and we continued our campaigning. People continued to come, to join us in the streets, and to go home and spread the word.
There is no reason to use violence against us. We are only walking to school.
Why are you throwing it on unarmed people?
We are only going to school.
Why are you doing that? Why are you throwing gas at the students? They have signs and books in their hands. Would you be a student like this? Tel Aviv University, Hebrew University, Technion. We're just going to school.
No reason to use violence against us. We are students going to school.
Would you be attacked at your schools?
You think it's funny? Why are you laughing?
Now, actually, the same support is reviving in different forms, of course. And that's why Israeli government now is fighting them, detaining them and shipping them out because they defend human rights and they don't want, the Israelis don't want witnesses about the crimes they commit against the Palestinians.
Last year when I tried to come back, the Israeli government denied me entry. So this is actually the first time in 12 years that I've been back here in Palestine. And being back here now, working as a volunteer again for the PRCS, it's as if nothing much has changed. I mean, I still feel very motivated to work as a volunteer, and it's nice to see back old friends like you, and to be of help. I think once I got to know the Palestinians the first time in 1975, it was some kind of virus that took hold of me, and it never let go again. And I think until the day I die, it will stay with me.
Today, the ISM is under attack by the Israeli army. It is seeking to evict us from the occupied territories, only making the point clearer, by the way, to the international community, that the Palestinians are indeed a people imprisoned on their own land. And the Israeli occupation forces are the wardens to this prison, because you cannot get access to the Palestinian people, whether you are an ISM activist, a United Nations worker, a human rights worker, a caregiver, a doctor, or a nurse, unless you receive permission from the Israelis first. This policy that Israel is using to keep us out will only backfire as people question it more and more and ask Israel, what do you have to hide?
The current Israeli government, I don't have a great deal of faith that they're gonna listen to any message from me. I think it has become clear that this government does not care about the safety of its own people and doesn't care at all about the lives of Palestinian people. I think it's ridiculous that my government supports this government and referred to Ariel Sharon as a man of peace. It's clear to me, being here, that Ariel Sharon is invested in perpetuating a cycle, well, perpetuating violence. I think calling it a cycle of violence disregards the imbalance of power in this situation, that people's lives here are almost completely controlled by the Israeli government. And it's amazing that people are able to hold on to their humanity as much as they have.
The only person who was capable of preventing this was Ariel Sharon, because he was the Minister of Defense at the time. He gave the green light for the operation. He, in my mind, and I've seen everything regarding the massacre in Sabra Shetina. And afterwards, I read every piece of information I could get hold of, because I just wanted to make clear for myself, my God, what happened here? How did it happen? Why did it happen? How could it happen? All my investigations, and I've got many documents about this in my bookcases at home, everything led to one person's responsibility, that of Ariel Sharon. And he is the Prime Minister of Israel right now. A war criminal.
Mr. Bush may believe that Mr. Sharon is a man of peace. Anyone who knows anything about Mr. Sharon knows that that's the last thing you could say about him. But when Mr. Bush says this, it garners support for his political party and support for his policies. I'm shocked and distressed and deeply concerned over what I have seen and what I have learned the few days that I have been here. The people of Israel, on purpose or not, knowingly or not, are creating a situation which will leave their nation facing crises for decades to come. The Palestinian people are suffering occupation, deprivation, humiliation, fear, and bloodshed. And the American people, who are not responsible for this but are contributing to the problem, do not understand and do not know what it is that's happening.
It's just heartbreaking to see what is happening in this part of the world. And as a U.S. citizen, we have an enormous influence on what happens in the world, and we should use it properly. And as an American citizen, we do have a democracy, not perfect, but we do influence what our government does, sometimes. And I think it's part of our responsibility as citizens of a democracy to, one, educate ourselves but also compel our governments to behave in a rational way in these situations.
I've seen checkpoints where there's like hundreds of people in line and there's a soldier checking everyone. The line doesn't seem like it's moving anywhere and it's hot, you know, burning scorching sun, and you have one soldier standing on top of a block pointing a gun down at children and mothers, and that's just ridiculous. And just living inside the walls would make him feel like a prisoner, and it's just I was just baffled by everything I've seen. Like the best word to describe it is just inhumane. I can't imagine anyone living like that, and it's really scary to see that in the year of 2004. And it's really what makes it even more like sad or more baffling is that the people who are doing this to these people are the same people who came through the Holocaust and had to be treated like this. So it's like I really don't understand it.
We were going through the Kilandia checkpoint, and my three friends were being showed their passport to one officer, and I was moved over to another one, and he looked at my passport for the longest time, and then he said, "Are you Jewish?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Have you been to Ramallah?" And I didn't answer. And then he said, "Don't you know the word is out that any Jew who goes to Ramallah is going to be cut in half. And it is very dangerous. Don't you ever go there anymore. You're going to be cut in half." And he repeated it again and again and again. And here I am in Ramallah. And no one has even tried to cut me in half. And, you know, I can go back and say, you know, these are the stories that you hear, but they're not true, because I was here and these things did not happen to me.
These are people that have been detained because they're working outside of whatever village they're from in order to like gain support for their family or to do different things. And so because of their ages, because of the fact that they were traveling like without the proper documentation, despite the fact they were working within the Palestinian areas, they were traveling from one Palestinian village to another and didn't necessarily even have access to the different Israeli places. They were detained like this for quite a while. There's a group of school children that were coming down the steps that were leading right into this. And this path back here leads directly to like Hebron proper, the part is occupied. Essentially the entire inner part of the city, the heart of the city, this is the main road, is choked off from the rest of the city and occupied by Israeli soldiers. The settlers all carry weapons, like children pretty much are carrying weapons. Teenagers like are able to carry weapons, while Palestinians whose land this is that they're actually in, these are all Palestinian shops that have been closed down because the settlers came in. As you can see, they've got Israeli flags strewn across the top of the, strewn throughout the place. And despite the fact that Hebron has thousands and thousands of Palestinians, 150 settlers, mostly from New York, were able to come and take this because they had weapons and because they had supported the Israeli military, and they're able to occupy this area, and it's cutting off business for various people that we saw. Children are having problems. They have to go every day past this checkpoint, and we saw them once they reached the bottom of the stairs, they just started running.
I believe that Israel is only for Jewish. It's only for Israel. And Hebron, and Bethlehem, and Nablus, and Ramallah, and Jerusalem. All this for our, for Israeli.
The Palestinian people, what you will do with them?
I want them in Jordan, and in Tunis, and in
far away. So you believe
far away.
Well, he said he thinks they should go away. The people who are here need to leave, so they need to be forcibly.
Where's your parents from?
That's ethnic cleansing. Ethnicity based on religion, Muslim, Christian. He said only Jews.
One at a time.
Where you are? This is anti-Semitism toward Muslims and Christians.
Israel.
Grandfather.
Grandfather from Israel. Yes.
Where did he come from?
From Polish.
Polish? So you are Polish.
Yeah. Yes, but I am Israeli.
And now you are telling others not to live here.
I
Remember the ghettos in
I
Warsaw?
want peace, but I want.
That's the joke.
I want peace
On your
there.
terms.
When they leave.
Israeli here and Palestinian.
Let me ask you a question. Do you know who
Where there? Where?
You know who Hitler is?
He
He's
said
not German,
Tunis.
he's all Jews. Do you think
He
was
said
right?
they need to go
But
somewhere
that-
else.
you believe
He
that?
cleansed
Joe,
them,
that was
killed
just-
them, moved them, transfer.
I was born here. Where do you want me to go?
You need to take your family to their Arab.
Oh my God.
Arab country.
You have more Jews in Miami than anywhere here. So go to Miami
Then the
then.
Jews of Miami need to go here, need to visit here and need to live here.
Visit here or
Visit and live here
What
in
about the
Hebron, in
people
Petah Tikva, in Tel Aviv, in Jerusalem.
Because your hand.
I don't want to kill Palestinians.
I know.
I don't want, and the soldiers also don't want to kill
But you
people.
want them to leave their land.
But they are being.
No, it's
they're-
our land. No, it's our land.
It's there. That's
I
your
think
opinion.
it's our land.
I think it's your land. Who's right?
Now we have, I think, about 8 families that have returned to live, although always and continuously under the threat of settlers who come down from the hillside. There's one specifically, Victor, who rides his 4x4 through the olive groves down into the village, into the house that was given to the internationals to stay and have a presence here in order to mitigate the settlers. They even walk in there and pray. They go down to the well and pray, and then oftentimes they contaminate the well by allowing their dogs to swim in it. They've destroyed the generator. We've now got a new one. They've destroyed the water tanks that the people use to store water as cisterns. And in general, it's a form of terrorizing the population. But for these people, violence has never been the way of resistance. Rather, for them, the greatest resistance they've put forward is just to stay and to weather through it. Despite one being shot last week, one of the villagers, despite one of the older men having his eye, being blind permanently in one eye because of being hit by the settlers, they've never lashed back. Rather, they stay put, at least the remaining 8 families.
Now, Israel, of course, wants to have a Palestinian state because there's 3.5 million Palestinians in the occupied territories that it can't digest. Because if it in fact makes this all one country, from the Jordan to the Mediterranean, and gives the Palestinian citizenship, it ceases to be a Jewish state, which is the antithesis of the whole point of Zionism. If, on the other hand, it makes this one country and doesn't give the Palestinian citizenship, it becomes apartheid. And even in the world of George Bush, it's hard to sell apartheid these days. So the trick is, how do we keep control of the whole country, but get rid of the Palestinians? So what we do is we keep these settlement blocks. This, for example, this huge block in here is the Ma'ale Adumim block that helps create this greater Jerusalem that controls the entire center of the West Bank. And it keeps our control while at the same time then letting us give back little islands to the Palestinians to have a Bantustan, to have their dependent mini-state that isn't really viable. So what Israel has done in its settlement policies and road building is to hem it in. See, to build neighborhoods that separate between Palestinian neighborhoods so as to create these little disconnected islands for Palestinians, putting a wall and the border in between Palestinian communities to cut them off one from the other. And then building bypass roads to connect these settlements, but to bypass the Palestinian parts So locking the Palestinian parts into little disconnected islands.
Don't ever speak to me about a separation wall or an apartheid wall. That's totally misleading, because the Israelis will still be on both sides of that wall. So that's not separation. What it is a prison wall, which will force the Palestinians into smaller and smaller, more tightly controlled prisons until they're all in there. And then Israel will feel secure, but will never be.
And this particular wall, if it would go along maybe the 1967 border, maybe I could go along it. I don't think I even then would like it. But it's taking more Palestinian land. It's like a land grab. It's like, you know, I think Sharon and his people want a greater Israel from the Mediterranean to the Jordan River. And this is just another step in that direction. And it's wrong. But where is the world? What is the world saying or doing? They're not doing anything. They're not saying anything. Or they may say some few words, but they don't act on it. And so Sharon keeps on doing these awful things that he's doing. I feel that those who survived the Holocaust, or their children, or maybe grandchildren, the persecutees, those who have been persecuted, have now become the persecutors. It's almost as though they learned how to be persecutors. And that's a terrible lesson that they learned.
I think what we're doing is strictly nonviolent. We don't have any weapons. We're probably most likely going to be confronted by soldiers who do have weapons, and we're going to act in a strictly nonviolent way. This is strategic nonviolence.
We just had a relatively unsuccessful action here in the Tulkarm area. Again, you can see the fence, soon to be a wall, right behind me. Some of the internationals from the area cut a piece of the fence here, and then we're planning, along with the assistance of Palestinians, to shake and remove the gate that's blocking Palestinians from their farmland. The wall, fence now, wall soon to be, is just symbolic of everything that's wrong with the Palestinian-Israeli relations. It's ostensibly about security and peace and a two-state solution, but in actuality it's about annexation and separation. So it's an apartheid wall is really what it is, and that's why I'm here, to fight that injustice.
Yesterday it was in Kalkilia, where we painted the concrete wall that is there, plus the watchtower. There was no repression, and today we also tried to tear down the fence, open the gate, and so the Palestinians were able to pass, but we had a lot of repression. But outside of those three big actions, we do a lot of things with the people in the village. I'm now in Nablus, in Balata camp. It's a refugee camp. And we do also a lot of checkpoint watch. In the short term, I think, yes, we are helping them. Maybe when we can get them released at the checkpoint, or with the action of the wall, that we attract a lot of mass media, so they can see what's happening and why that there is a wall and there is a fence and that the people are not allowed to pass. But I don't know. I don't want to position it myself like I'm helping them, because I didn't came here as a savior, because if not, it would be a colonial way of thinking.
Now, a lot of internationals, we've set up a house that's been donated to us for internationals. We come here, it's sort of your typical international solidarity type work. You come in, you stay within a village. The presence of internationals helps to do a couple things. One, to build trust, communication, and a relationship with the villagers, so that they feel that they're not the only ones in the world, because unfortunately Palestinians do feel very much like they've been neglected, that they've undergone a great crime and no one's noticed. Secondly, it allows us to be eyewitnesses to what happens on the ground here and liaison with media. And finally, there's actions that happen. As internationals, you're less likely to be abused, to be victimized, than if you were a Palestinian and resisting. And that doesn't mean violent resistance whatsoever. Pretty much all solidarity volunteers here are non-violent. At the worst, they cut fences and destroy property. At the best, they stand in front of bulldozers. They stand in between military or rambunctious settlers and Palestinians who are scared of being shot. They help them cross checkpoints with hostile soldiers manning them. That's the kind of work that a lot of the internationals are doing here.
Stop! There are people behind you! You are 5 feet away from them. They are not moving.
Oh, look, they're knocking the trees down.
Let the trees alone at least. Come on. Why do you knock down trees? Are you shooting at us? Who are you shooting at?
Che brutta situazione.
Watch out for how this might come down. Watch it. Stop! There are people behind you!
לא בשעה 30.
פגעת במישהו.
כנראה שמישהו קיבל מכה מהדובי והוא כנראה במצב קשה. מה המצבו? אתה ראית אותו? כן, ראיתי אותו. לדעתי הוא נפטר.
The direct cause of death here is the suffocation as a result of dumping a large amount of soil over the American victim, Rachel Corrie. And there is, and the other causes as a fracture of ribs and fracture of clavicle, leading to emphysema in the chest. But the main cause is the suffocation.
Not one of us is planning to leave. We will all continue doing the same work that we were doing. We only hope that this incident makes the Israelis more cautious and makes our work more effective, so that they know that we will not move. I feel very, very upset. I am in shock. I've never had someone this close to me die before. It makes me very angry that they would do this to my friend. And it makes me very scared of what they will do to us and others in the future. I now feel the same way that almost every single Palestinian family must feel. I want to stress that this is one American out of the thousands of Palestinians that have been killed by the occupation.
As I look at what Rachel and the rest of the volunteers advise them here were doing, how they were in front day after day, sometimes twice a day, in a very dangerous, and I call it a combat situation, even though that combat is taking places in neighborhoods, people's houses, or the orchards. In the midst of all that danger, I would have said up until January of this year that I had never met anyone with enough courage to go back to that day after day, armed with a bullhorn and pink fluorescent vest and their convictions. But of course I had. She was my daughter.
It was upsetting to us at first that the versions of the stories were so different, because we had talked to eyewitnesses who said that the bulldozer went over Rachel and then backed up over her again. And the report, at least the first report that came out from the Israeli government, said that the bulldozer had never touched her.
A group of activists from the International Solidarity Movement were protesting and demonstrating against the destruction wrought by Israeli bulldozers along the borderline. We regularly place ourselves in between bulldozers and homes. On this occasion, an American citizen, Rachel Corrie, kneeled down in front of a bulldozer. The driver could clearly see where she was, that she was unarmed, that she was an international. From 10 meters away, he had time to react. He started driving towards her. The pile of earth in front of the bulldozer blade started to come over Rachel, and she tried to stand up, she tried to get away. Everybody who was there, who could see the bulldozer motioned what was going on. They shouted through a megaphone. We said that there was someone there. We pointed to the bottom of the blade. We were telling him there was someone there. He kept on going. He dragged Rachel under the earth, under the bulldozer blade, underneath the bulldozer, and waited over her body for a few seconds before withdrawing.
מי אשם במותה של רייצ'ל קורי?
ראשית, אני חייב לומר שיש בי כאב וצער על האובדן הזה, אובדן של חיים. ובכלל, כל אובדן חיים של אזרחים הוא דבר שאנחנו, ואני אישית, לוקחים אותו באופן קשה ביותר.
אתה יכול לקבוע שזה היה מוות מיותר?
חד משמעית זה היה מוות מיותר.
To exonerate someone of something, I can't exonerate myself of something I've done. Somebody else has to find me free of guilt. So if it strikes me that if the Israeli government believes the report that they're putting out, then they should be very happy to have somebody independent, like the American government or some other independent agency, come in and do their own investigation and come presumably those same findings, and then they can truly be exonerated of whatever happened, and we can be satisfied that we know the truth there.
She was seen, she was visible. The driver knew what he was doing. And in spite of what the Israelis have tried to say, that it was an accident and that no one's responsible for it, I think that they have not investigated seriously, and it would be good if the Americans themselves pressed for a proper investigation.
לא עבר הרבה זמן, אולי רבע שעה, יצאו מלפנינו כמה אנשים.
איזה אנשים?
זרים.
היה להם...
היה, אבל היה כתוב באנגלית, אני לא הבנתי מה היה כתוב שם. הבנתי שזה מפגינים.
מגפון?
כן.
There were two people in the bulldozer driving, and I'm sure they saw her. The photos show that they could see her. The idea of having two people in one bulldozer is to have a better range for seeing. And the bulldozer driver actually said to the camera that when you don't get an order to stop and you're a soldier, you just don't stop. He didn't say he didn't see her.
אנחנו במילואים, אנחנו קודם כל חיילים. עד שלא אומרים לנו לעצור, אני לא יכול לעצור עבודה.
He just said he didn't get an order to stop, so he ran her over. I think he's guilty in murder, and I think his commander is guilty in murder.
There are Americans who have said, heaven help them. She got what she asked for. Shameless, because it involves Israel. But let me step away from Rachel Corrie, a martyr, a heroine, somebody that should be respected and admired by all, and the persons who did it, the Israelis who claim it was an accident. Anyone who's ever seen the video knows it was no accident. It was done on purpose. I mean, you drive a bulldozer over someone, it isn't an accident. But the United States government, which had a major press crisis when a Chinese woman was arrested by the Chinese government and held in jail for a while, even the President of the United States talked about it. And when she returned, when she was released and returned, an American senator met her at the airport. This Chinese woman was not an American citizen. She was a legally resident alien. Shortly after that, An Ethiopian, also not an American citizen but an American resident, was taken by the Ethiopian government, which tremendous public relations media flap developed. For decades, the government of Israel has arrested American citizens and held them in jail, sometimes without charges, often for protracted periods of time, and on some occasions in which torture was alleged in sworn statements. The American government has never said a public word about that. When one of the organizations got 4 of these young Palestinian American citizens to appear on CNN to tell their story, and they did. It was a 7-minute segment, which in television is a lifetime. That segment can no longer be found in the CNN archives. It never happened. Do you understand? It never happened.
They broke into my house. They distributed themselves all over the place. I told them I was American. They said, shut up and sit down. I said, look, this is my house. I got my passport. I said, I'm an American. You can't do this. This is my house. And you know what he said? He said, this is no worse than what your country is doing in Afghanistan. I'm like, what gives the right to anyone, I don't care who it is and what the reasons are, to walk in someone's house? I still had my robe on. I'm in my nightgown. They come in my house, they take over everything, they break things, they urinate on the floor, and you can't talk to them. So being an American, at least in this part of the world, is no privilege at all. Israel hates everybody equally.
It's unfortunate that Israeli soldiers are acting arrogantly with the arrogance of power. Their machine guns, tanks, against journalists, whether local or foreign, against peace activists, whether local or foreign, against supporters of human rights, whether local or foreign, against United Nations employees, whether local or foreign. Until now, they have killed tens of them. Look at this American peace activist that was smashed by a caterpillar bulldozer used by the Israeli soldiers in Gaza. This is a crime. And all the witnesses said that she was trying to stop them, and they crushed her with the bulldozer. Sorry is not an excuse or a forgiveness. These are crimes, and those who committed these crimes must go to court.
Our sympathies in many ways had been with Israel. I think the sympathy of the U.S. Government is with Israel, and we really went along with that. I would read the kids' stories when they were small about the Holocaust, and so Rachel heard those stories of children, who survived and so forth. And
I don't think we understood, I'm sure we didn't understand the extent to which the occupation is an ongoing piece of violence against the Palestinian people. And I know I also didn't understand just how violent it could be, or is here. I think maybe in some sense it could be, but it is kind of constant basis until I heard from my daughter what she wrote.
With the fact that the Israeli military didn't take responsibility for their actions, and that the international community really didn't mobilize to hold Israel responsible, only a couple of weeks later, another international volunteer, 24-year-old Brian Avery from the United States, was shot with a high caliber bullet in the face while he was in the occupied West Bank town of Jenin. Only 6 days after Brian Avery was shot in the face, 21-year-old Tom Herdahl, a British national, was shot in the back of the head. Palestinians and international civilians were trying to erect a protest tent to dissuade the Israeli military from opening live fire on a gathering of internationals and Palestinians. As they were going to do this, Israeli forces opened fire from a watchtower, at which time it became too dangerous to stay in the area. Tom noticed Palestinian children in the area. Most of them ran away as soon as the Israeli military opened fire, but 3 had become frightened and paralyzed from their fear. Tom went over to a group, to 2 young boys, and moved them out of the line of Israeli fire into safety. And then he saw a little girl who was also paralyzed from fear and was in a very dangerous position. And he went over to her. And as he was bending down to take her hand, he was hit in the back of the head with a live bullet.
A group from the International Solidarity Movement was in Rafah, in the Yibna area. We had come to the area to do an action, to do some human shield work, but when we realised that there was a lot of heavy shooting, we decided to pull back and move to an area which was out of danger. Tom saw that in an area which the soldiers were shooting into, there were women and children standing around. He walked to the area and he was motioning for them. He was motioning for them to come back to try and maybe get them out of danger. And I saw him kind of, when he was standing up, he kind of shook. I saw blood around his neck. He fell to the ground.
And I suppose we're quite disappointed because we would very much like to meet with the IDF. But as yet, we haven't had the opportunity to do so. We do hope there will be we do hope there will be an opportunity to meet with them where we can have open discussion and honest answers. We don't come to criticise, we simply come to find the truth. I mean, Tom was first and foremost a humanitarian. He wasn't necessarily politically minded, although he was very interested in working out, and developing his interest in politics. That was happening at the same time. But first and foremost, he'd come out here to help. And that was Tom. And I can just imagine him just reaching out to children. He's got a younger brother, Freddie, and he was always very kind and very protective with Freddie. And it would have been so natural for Tom just to reach out for these 2 children and see them to safety. I mean, that is absolutely Tom. It's a very poor place. Life looks extremely hard. I don't know how they live hearing gunshots daily. They have got used to it. Have they got used to it? Surely they haven't got used to it. It's become a way of life. That's just unacceptable. Absolutely unacceptable way to live life. And I can imagine Tom thinking exactly the same, only more strongly.
They knew what they were doing. He was clearly marked. He was wearing a vest like I'm wearing. He was with a group of internationals. They knew we were there. They knew what we were doing. And still they decided that they would shoot him. We've also become convinced here that there's a direct connection between him being shot and what the Israelis did the following week. That there was an invasion, a very large invasion into Rafah. 60 tanks, bulldozers and APCs came into that area of Rafah, the Yibna area, a week later. And we believe that if we had been able to carry out our plan the day that Tom was shot, to put a tent up in the area of Yibna, which would have made it more difficult for tanks to roll into the streets of Yibna, they would not have been able to carry out that operation.
Just to think that a girl who, with all good intentions, just trying to help in a cause that so greatly needs help, and she comes here and she gets killed by an Israeli soldier who so blatantly ran over her and murdered her, like totally unthinking of her human rights or her as being an equal person or anything. And then for the American government to just kind of like sweep that away and just, you know, take it as if it wasn't even a big deal. I mean, I'm sure especially for her family and all her friends, like, that's a horrible thing. It totally should never ever happen. And just the fact that it did just shows how corrupt the American government can be, that they would allow something like that to happen and to not take proper repercussions against the Israeli government, against the military for doing such a thing. I think there's like a direct connection between the Israeli media and what the U.S. receives as media due to who's in power and who controls the media. And it's something that needs to be changed and something that definitely needs to be worked on, but sadly, due to the fact of how power and money has so much to do with the media, as I'm sure everyone, all Palestinians already can see every day, it's something very hard to change.
I think that in the United States, which is the only place we can talk from, that the media coverage is not only comes from Israel physically for the most part, but it comes from the perspective of Israel. So our understanding of the conflict here changed dramatically when our daughter started to write to us about it and what she observed. And we know that Rachel was very careful about her facts and what she would write. She writes dramatically about the people so that you understand and love them and see them as she did, but she was very careful about facts. So then I understood that I hadn't gotten the story before then.
When I called my daughters in the United States and I told them about this, and my daughters read the news every day, of course they're very interested in Palestine because I live here, they didn't hear about it. Imagine an American girl that her tax dollars, her parents' tax dollars, her friends' tax dollars paid for her death. You know, we all paid for Rachel's death.
The United States is a very special case when it comes to the powerful elements that influence the public opinion. You have the legislative bodies, the executive bodies, and you have the media. Media can be more powerful than both executive and legislative powers when well-informed and well-mobilized. But I have to say here that a lot of the influential networks or papers are influenced to a great extent by certain circles of the administration or the Congress. It's not official because these institutions are private, but it is indirect. And that's why I'm saying influenced in a certain direction to serve the line of the administration.
And I think it comes as a surprise to a lot of Americans to know, you know, how many Palestinians have died during this last intifada. And we don't get that information very easily. Also, when we're talking about the violence, everybody, I think most people in America think about suicide bombings and Hamas. That's what they primarily hear about. And they don't hear about tanks coming into people's streets or Apache helicopters very much, you know, coming through and dropping things, houses, people dying because the house next door to them was demolished and theirs fell down too, about the olive orchards and the greenhouses and all of that. That doesn't get mentioned in the same reports.
It's true, the American people do not pay much attention. And if you add to that the fact that much of the information that they get tends to be biased, in a free country, you can do that, you have the problem that we're talking about now, in which the Americans do not see the Palestinians the same way they see the Israelis, although, if they were ever to stop to think about it, it's perfectly clear that it's the Israelis who are now suppressing the Palestinians and have been for decades.
I've been a witness here, and I've seen that on 4 sides of Rafah there is an enclosure. It's like a prison. The Israelis are building a prison, and the people in the world don't know about this. I was on the telephone last night to a friend and telling them what I had seen, and this friend of mine was angry. She was angry because she said, "Why don't we hear this on the news? Why don't I know about this?" And the people of England, they want to know. And if I go back there and I speak to people, then more people will be aware of what's happening here.
When I started to get the emails, and you know, they came over the course of almost 2 months, and it was eye-opening for me. And of course, I always loved to read anything Rachel wrote, no matter where she was. But it was certainly eye-opening to me. And then I decided to send them off, you know, copies off to her brother and her sister and some of our other relatives. And I remember asking my son, Chris, "What do you think?" And he goes, "Well, you just never hear this perspective. It's a perspective I, you know, really know very little about." So she really became our eyes and ears there. And Rachel wrote about her connections with children in Gaza and in Rafah specifically. She wrote about one child who went over and closed the door to the house that they were staying in because the child was afraid, a little girl, I think, that if the door was open, that then people could come through and start, I think Rachel thought that they would start chopping at her, doing something really violent in a child's mind, and that she thought if the door was closed, that would keep them out. She wrote about being inside a house, I think when you know, there was military activity outside, and still the women were having some tea, and she was playing with the babies. She worked with the youth in the Youth Congress, and they were really working on democratic principles. I know at one point they had a mock trial of actually President Bush and of Prime Minister Sharon as she was observing and being a participant in this process with these children. She also mentioned how remarkable it was that the children who were in this pretty violent environment, still their recommendations for what should happen to President Bush or Ariel Sharon was that they should be taken maybe to court, to like an international court or something for what they were doing. It wasn't that they were wishing any particular violence upon them.
Rachel Corrie.
Your age?
23 years old.
Your nationality?
I'm from the United States of America.
Say after me, I will.
I will.
Tell the truth.
Tell the truth.
This is Rafah Boys' school, but when we went to the Youth Congress, there was a young boy, I think I'll always remember his eyes, and he made this speech, and he said that when Rachel first came, that he told his friends not to play with her because she was an American, and you know, they were sinister. And but he said then he watched and he saw how she did play with him. She played soccer with the kids, with the boys, football, and then he said, and then she died for them. And he said that it had changed how he felt, you know, about Americans. And when you see some of these children, you see a lot of pain, I think, in their eyes. A lot of them that it's hard to know what they've suffered, losses of parents and relatives and brothers and sisters. So it's heartwarming when you see one that feels like what happened to her has kind of changed his view of things a little bit.
I can say, like, I am shocked by how much it touched the community in Rafah and I believe all of Palestine. Like the amount of respect and love and sadness the community in Rafah continues to feel for Rachel, and continues to talk about, and continues, they continue to build things in her honor, and talk to their children about her, and the fact that I mean, it went beyond anything any politician could do.
Yeah.
I believe that Rachel is a very special person. That, you know, there's some people in life across the world that genuinely feel responsibility toward others, and I think Corrie was a perfect example of that. Miss Corrie.
This particular incident really moved me like no other thing. And maybe it is the realization that what she did, and of course she didn't want to die, but what she did, you know, giving her own life for the freedom of Palestinians. It was the ultimate sacrifice. So the reason I came here really is that I wanted to know the place where Rachel Corrie died, and to honor her memory.
There were, as you say, stamps in her life, things that that I felt she would always do. One was her writing. She and her intense observation. She had a way of a gift, really, I think, for very acute observation of what was going on with people around her. She also had a real gift for making strong connections with people. Really, I think many kinds of people felt comfortable with Rachel. So I think, again, those qualities surfaced when she was here. Well, she said, as a fifth grader, she had a list of ambitions, and a long list, and it included being an actress, I think, and a poet, and a mother, and many things. But one
ballet
of them,
ballet teacher, and a humanitarian activist was one of them.
A humanitarian activist was on her list when she was 10 years old of the things she wanted to be. So I guess we should have known.
Yeah. But she also wanted to be the first woman president of the United States on that list.
It is absolutely unacceptable for the Israeli military, under the orders of the Israeli government, to destroy the homes of innocent civilians. It can only be understood as an act of collective punishment. Often they come and on the pretext that they're destroying the houses which are used by the resistance. Well, we work in houses here in Rafah, and we know from the months that we've spent, other people have spent months here, people over the months, we have been in houses which are constantly under threat, and we know that there is no resistance going on in these houses.
Well, I always have found that to destroy the homes of people is to destroy one of the most precious and central possessions in their life. I mean, a house, to violate the sanctity of a house where people find security, protection. It's the ultimate, I think, ultimate form of violence and terrorism I can imagine. And this way of collective punishment, I think it is so barbaric and so completely contradiction with any form of decent behavior or civilization that I just cannot grasp it. That Israelis are not coming out in huge numbers to protest against this kind of barbaric treatment.
You can see for yourself. I mean, this was a beautiful, flourishing city with families who have roots for generations. And now, and other families who came and coexisted with them, were welcomed by them. It's this, you know, there used to be a railroad here. There used to be houses and people sitting outside talking for hours at night and loving things and loving each other, and now all of that is erased, just like this, and now it's like a ghost street, you know?
She loved the ocean.
That's a great picture.
Yeah, she absolutely loved the ocean, always. And I think on that same list in which she wrote that she'd like to have a cat for the sad days, I think she also wrote that it'd be nice to live where she could always see the sea. Which she found it very troubling that the children in Rafah were so close to the sea, but were cut off from it. It was very painful to her. There was a photograph of the kids when they were little, when she was a baby. This was her brother Chris and her sister Sarah sitting on the front porch out here. And so at some point she did this little drawing, watercolor wash kind of thing for me, for Mother's Day, 1998. And wrote this poem for me. I'd forgotten that was there.
She read it herself?
Yeah. Happy Mother's Day, 1998. You are my poet maker. You're the cannon I shoot from. I keep your eyes in my shirt pocket and try them on to look at daffodils. I am the bun that turned into a kumquat when I came out of your oven. Sometimes for a minute I understand what God is when I'm looking at you. Thanks, Mama.
I'm just horrified, you know, every day that I live here, I'm horrified to see these people who are just so kind and so peaceful and so generous. Their houses destroyed, their children killed, women, men, indiscriminately. But at the same time, I'm so inspired, you know, every day. Every day I'm seeing people rebuilding their houses, you know, and people building and people giving to each other and people eating and sharing their food and sharing tea and talking to each other. And I learn a little bit about how to love people, how to be strong, how people can face the worst situations and still be good to one another and still love peace. I think that here you find people that love peace more than maybe any people in the world, because they know so well what it means to be at war, that they know from experience how valuable peace can be.
The murder of Rachel made me feel that I didn't want to live anymore. I had enough. But then I thought of her dedication, and I felt that I have to stay here for her. The Israeli occupation force always tries to scare us when we work down there in Palestine. One tries to make us leave Palestine so they can continue with their dirty work unattended. By killing Rachel, they did more than scare us. They did utter